Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It's a Sunday morning here in Minnesota. I want to start this episode off by saying please help this cafe if you can. I got a mortgage due here, and the revenue just hasn't been very good. I mean, we're doing what we can. We're close to having it, but if anybody wants to help support the coffee shop and this channel, please hit up my Patreon page, or even better, my PayPal page. Tell me to pay this upcoming mortgage payment. This is an important archive of jazz that we need to preserve for people to have access to. I mean, the current political landscape has made it tough. I mean, there's a mentality out there that Black American music shouldn't be celebrated among some of these townsfolk. And it's enough for them just to dismiss me out of hand and just not come in. So most of my business, over half of it, comes from 30 miles away, which for a coffee shop isn't good. So I get a lot of out-state support. Twin Cities folks from 90 minutes away, Rochester folks, La Crosse folks. I mean, the people come from a long ways. It's the locals who just don't support me or come in or embrace this as part of their community. And politics aside, just being an outsider in a small town, that's enough to keep you on the outside of that community. And then you add politics into that. And again, I'm not even a citizen. I don't vote. I don't go to rallies. I don't have posters in my yard. It's just the decor and the music. I mean, obviously, I'm very left of center when it comes to my ideology, but I'm certainly not influencing people in how they should vote. But anyway, if you want to see this channel survive and this cafe survive, if you can't help out, anything helps. Gifts of $100 are very appreciated. Those who helped me on my last episode, thank you. There was a couple of you who gave me a nice little gift, and it went to pay my power bill. So that being said, we're going to move on. One of the great eras of Blue Note that kind of gets overlooked is the Blue Note Cool, which happens 60, 61, and it was led primarily by Lou Donaldson, but other guys dabbled in it. Some of the early Grant Green records are early jazz, soul jazz, but they're also kind of cool. And there's a crossbreeding that happens post hard bop, post Afro-Cuban, where those styles kind of assimilate into the main trunk of the tree. And I'll say this about Sing 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 from my last episode. It's as good a test tube example of what jazz is. Me and my friend Brian again were talking about that. And if you were to give a person, just a blind person, an example of what jazz is, and the energy and the propulsion and then the intensity and the flavor, I mean, Salt Peanuts doesn't do that. Sing 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 absolutely nails that. And jazz is a much bigger thing than the era of the 60s. And Sing 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 captures a much bigger essence of what that music was. But there was an era, and Sing 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 is grafted from the main trunk of what jazz is. Unlike Salt Peanuts, which would be a small branch on a really teeny branch on a smaller branch. But the main trunk of the tree is that swing, pop, sensible dance music from the 30s and the 40s. But as hard bop and Afro-Cuban kind of get melded into that trunk, which is what happens in all genres of music, new innovation kind of assimilates itself into the main body and becomes just another aspect of what that music's about. And its innovations become, I mean, you can look at hip-hop. You look at guys like Kanye West, he's essentially a pop singer. The hip-hop elements of that are very much watered down to the point where it's as much hip-hop, I mean, it's as much pop, R&B, hip-hop as it is any one of those things on its own. But jazz kind of melds things into its core. And so you can have elements of things moving forward without really being entrenched in that subgenre. And you see that with the third stream, you see that with the cool, you see that with so many different aspects of what jazz is. New things come along, they have their own kind of sound and identity for a minute, but then they eventually just become part of the larger puzzle. So, in that 59, 60, 61 era, Blue Note doesn't do a lot of real Afro-Cuban stuff. I mean, Dorm has a couple things, there's a few other pieces that kind of touch on that. But it wasn't really a strong part of what Blue Note presented. However, there's a moment in, like I said, 60, 61 where Lou Donaldson, post his hard bop bebop era, but pre his boogaloo, alligator boogaloo era. I mean, he does some great boogaloo stuff, which is definitely kind of that soul jazz rhythm and blues stuff. But this cool moment of Donaldson's is almost always has Latin inflection with conga players. Ray Barretto's on a number of those records. Like I said, Grant Green dabbles, and there's a couple other artists that really have some records. And there are less celebrated Blue Notes because they're not innovative, they're not challenging, they're actually quite easy to listen to. I think the three sounds you could probably throw in this camp as well at times. And again, there's quite a few records that were in this moment where they're grafting parts of Latin jazz into their sound without really being Afro-Cuban in that strong Dizzy Gillespie Afro kind of sense. And so what I'm talking about to you today specifically is Lou Donaldson, Lightfoot. Herman Foster's on the piano, the great Chicago piano was blind. I love Herman Foster's boogie. I love his stride. He has a real swinging nature to his blues that he plays. The version of Green Eyes on here is just wonderful. Jimmy Wormwood shows up, and Peck Morris, and then you have Barretto. So you have rhythm section, Lou Donaldson, and a conga player. And it's just fun. It's melodically centered. It's very accessible. This era of Donaldson, I think, sold pretty well for Blue Note. Let's be clear on that. Hogma, Stella by Starlight. It's just a really fun, lighthearted atmosphere. Lou showing some swing, some melodic center. Again, Lou has the chops. If you listen to that Birdland early Jazz Messenger stuff with Blakey and Clifford Brown, you can hear Donaldson Lou takes off. That's hard bop fury. So he's definitely kind of pulled the reins back here, and he's playing in a bit more of a melodic, grooving kind of way that's really appealing and it's very good cafe, coffee shop. I mean, when I used to DJ my brunch sets, those records would fit in, and I didn't play a lot of horn jazz because horns can be bright, but Donaldson's creamy alto just would be lifting over the room, and it was just a wonderful thing. So it's a really fun record, and he has a number of records from this era, all with really fun covers as well. And they don't go for the big bucks. They don't really hit the Tone Poet reissue series. I mean, they seem to be kind of almost ignored by a lot of collectors today, and yet they're super fun. They're super fabulous Blue Note of that era. And the hard bop scene is kind of on a descent. It's on a downward trajectory at this point in terms of its power and velocity and its place in the world. And the innovations of Ornette Coleman on Atlantic and Contemporary are kind of contemporaneous with this development of Blue Note. And Coleman's pushing the music in sonic, different directions. And Lou is almost pulling it back to its center, pulling it back to a very listenable, accessible place that's very enjoyable. And it's light, but still really edifying, really good eating. I mean, it's still a very satisfying meal, without question. I can't recommend those records enough. They're absolutely fabulous. Good Gracious, that's another one. So yeah, the Donaldson record is just fantastic. It's so much fun. Light, bubbly, full of energy, and it's still potent in a Blue Note sense. focused, energetic, just on the lighter side of alcohol. I mean, this is a nice clean vodka versus a heavy brown syrup. So another fun record, another female singer, Lucia Pulk. And she has another 10-inch on the Trend label. Both these records go for pretty good money, to be honest. This is on the Mode label, a West Coast label. Pretty tough record to come by. And again, it can fetch upwards of $100. She's a nice, light vocalist. It's got the blue ink on the back, so you know it's a first pressing there. A lot of West Coast guys are on this session, including the great Bob Hardaway, who I'm a big fan of, whose Bethlehem 10-inch is just wonderful. Mel Lewis is on the drums. But she worked with Dave Pell, who has some work at Atlantic and at Trend, and he shows up several other places as well. Pell, an alto saxophonist, an arranger, composer guy, and so he does some work with her as one of his singers in his group. And his groups tended to be kind of larger ensembles, but she got enough kind of recognition through that avenue that she gets these 2 sessions, for one for Trend, who, if I remember, a lot of some Pell stuff was for. And then Mode gets her on this session. And we listened to it yesterday, me and my friend Brian, and it's light. She's got a nice tone. I mean, she's not dripping in the blues or dripping in an austerity and a pain, but she certainly is a nice emoter and a nice expressor, and has a nice jazz sense to her. This Gene Ammons record, it's classic him battling with Sonny Stitt. And Stitt here at times, I think it's on the tenor if I remember. Lou Donaldson's also on this. But I think they're both on tenors. Where does it say here? But what's fun about it is Stitt really sounds like Coltrane at times here. Like just a really vivacious tone and full of energy and electricity. And Ammons does work with Coltrane some at this point in the late 50s. And at first I thought maybe this one of those all-star sessions with Coltrane, but it's Stitt that he's working with. And the first side is a bit of a different group with Ammons, Donaldson, Farmer, Freddie Redd, Addison Farmer, Kenny Clark. 56, 50, yeah, all these sessions are pretty much 56, it looks like. One session from 51 and 50 looks like, so all the Ammons Stitt stuff is actually from pretty early, 50, 51. Really cool stuff, great classic cover, real classic prestige look here. I can't remember the name of the graphic artist here. Oh, it says it right there, but my old man eyes can't read it. Handman, maybe? Ammons was a great bluesy professor of the blues. He was incarcerated not long after this and spent a number of years in jail for drug charges. Big fan of Ammons' work. His stuff in these Blowing Session All-Star records of prestige. Just a real giant that's kind of overlooked today. And he was the son of the great boogie-woogie piano player Albert Ammons. So a great jazz lineage as well. Another great singer here that's kind of forgotten is Jane Fielding. And this is on the West Coast again here for the Jazz West imprint, which is affiliated with Imperial and Score and that whole Aladdin family of labels. Interesting group here. Red Mitchell, Lou Levy, who's a great piano player and very, again, West Coast guy, very overlooked today. Singing some Shorty Rogers ballads, Stars Didn't Fall on a Summer Day. All in all, again, a very light styling, beautiful woman. Has a real Japanese pressing, of course. The Jazz West originals are pretty rare and go for pretty good money. But wonderful coffee shop jazz. It's the kind of stuff that people are looking for, but don't always know what to look for. I mean, if that makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of people who think of an idyllic sound of jazz that's set in film, and then when they look, all these people telling them what kind of jazz to buy, they end up with Pithecanthropus erectus, and they're like, no, not what I was looking for. Pharoah Saunders? No, not exactly what I had in mind. So now this is great Billie Holiday. And this was initially issued on Clef, a great David Stone Martin cover. And I've done episodes on DSM before, the different eras of his artwork, and this looks like kind of more of a watercolor era for him. Maybe acrylic, I'm not sure, but great band here with the great Benny Carter, the great Harry Sweets Edison, Barney Kessel's on the guitar, Jimmy Rowles is on the piano, John Simmons on the bass, and Larry Bunker on the drums. So just, again, Norman Granz all-star body of work. Probably recorded in 54, 55, 56, probably 55, late in the Clef sequence, and then early in the Verve reissue sequence of 8026. And also got issued in the 5000 series, which the 5000 series was kind of a poppier. So this is a bit lighter for Billie Holiday, to be honest. That being said, it still has a ton more grit to it than the aforementioned Jane Fielding or Lucia Pulk. I mean, Billie Holiday, on her lightest day, is still a heavy grit sandpaper. I mean, that's going to belt down some concrete. She's going to be able to grind down a lot of things. She's a powerfully motor on the highest level of the emoting scale. And her emoting capacity so supersedes her talent and ability. She had a very limited vocal range, which isn't often discussed. Her range was considered to be 1 octave. But it was her capacity and ability to emote and to tell a story and to tell a narrative and to really express a lyric and make you feel something that really was unrivaled. And again, anything Billie Holiday, Norman Granz is definitely worth grabbing. It's phenomenal stuff. So I had a large group come in yesterday and it paused my video. I never really got back to it. It was good to have some business. They were from Indiana, northern Indiana. But I didn't get to finish my episode yesterday. So moving on here, the next thing I want to play for you is Swings the Thing by Al Sears. Another one of those gentlemen that's largely forgotten today on the Swingsville Prestige label 2018. And the Swingsville label was a subs label for Prestige, where Weinstock was putting a lot of the older guard guys that he was signing and recording them under that name, under that label. And the more progressive stuff was staying on the Prestige print. Wally Richardson's on the guitar, who's really fantastic on this, actually. Wendell Marshall's on the bass. Don Abney on the piano. Joe Marshall on the drums. Al is a fantastic tenor player. This is a wonderful, easy trad jazz piece. Small group setting. Again, the guitar playing of Wally Richardson is just fantastic. I've talked about the Swingsville, Moodsville labels that Weinstock launched in probably 58-9. And without any question, there's some real quality old guard veteran playing on those labels. Just real blues, black church, gospel drenched. It seems to exist regardless of what's modern and current. And there's no attempt here to be Clifford Brown or Sonny Rollins or John Coltrane or the new guard. These guys are definitely playing in an older, laid-back blues tradition, gospel tradition, soul tradition. It's full of the blues. It's full of expression. It's full of the expression of soul. And so in no way are these lesser than those modern younger kids doing the more cutting edge stuff. In fact, these records are actually easier to get into and they're more accessible to anyone. I mean, some of that younger kid stuff, and by younger kids, these guys were, even the younger guard, were still in their 30s and 40s for the most part. I mean, Clifford Brown was really young. And he was a huge influence on everything in the jazz scene, obviously, as was guys like Ornette Coleman coming up. Coleman was, approaching middle age as his popularity grew. But these old cats, were playing outside of the swing band setting, so they're in smaller groups, but they're playing wonderful standards and with wonderful amounts of expression, and from the experience of knowledge and the experience of miles on the odometer. They're such enjoyable records, really they are. And that Sears record is no exception. And Sears, like I said, has become a very forgotten figure. I think he played with Basie for a little bit. I can't remember who else Al Sears played with, but here's a Bethlehem recording. I did some Bethlehem digging last week. Howard McGee. And McGee was a big part of the bebop movement in Minton's and at New York, and a young and up-and-coming fantastic trumpeter in the shadow of Gillespie and Fats Navarro, but certainly more accomplished at the bebop sound and era than Miles Davis was. McGee was a very preeminent figure in those Minton's Playhouse jam sessions, and he was a big part of what was happening, and he records some interesting sessions over the years. He never gets a long contract anywhere, so he kind of does move around a lot, all of which kind of diminishes his amount of luminosity in today's world. He didn't do a string of Blue Notes or a string of Impulse. He does show up in interesting places. He does have, I think, 3 records of Bethlehem, one of which doesn't come out until quite a bit later, once King had taken control of Bethlehem, Dusty Blue, which is really a great record. But this is an interesting session here. Howard McGee played selections from 20th century Cinescope production, The Best Things in Life Are Free. And so it actually has a pretty big band assembled, big production values, big numbers, big woodwind section, a big rhythm section, including the great Al Caiola on the guitar, who I've always been a big Al Caiola fan. O.C. Johnson's on, and Don Lamond on the drums at times. It's recorded in 1956 in New York City. And there's Howard McGee. And once again, Gus Wilde and Creed Taylor, of course. I believe Creed Taylor was probably still the producer on this session. Music arrangement. It's a Burt Goldblatt cover, of course. In 56, I'm pretty sure it's still a Creed Taylor production. And you honestly, for my dollar, you can feel his impact on it, because Creed always had a poppier sensibility and wanted to be marketable to middle-class white America, even though a Bethlehem label didn't have that type of distribution. They were very much a regional tri-state New York area distributed label. And I've talked about Bethlehem how many times on this channel, but what a great little label that's really fallen into, for the most part, obscurity. Just 200 titles of some great jazz, including that 10-inch stuff that's fabulous, running from 53 to 59 or so. And then, of course, they're sold to King, and they become a King subsidiary at that point. And King puts some stuff out on the Bethlehem print that's kind of warehouse outtakes and stuff they've been sitting on, and they issued as a Bethlehem Jazz title, but very different from what Bethlehem and Gus Wilde were doing in the 50s, that later stuff. Another Bethlehem title, this is BCP number 24, so this is even earlier than what we just heard on, that was 61. This one's probably 55. Again, Joe Puma, another great guitar player. So Caiola, Wally Richardson, we're getting a lot of great guitarists here. Herby Man, Harold Granowski, there's the drummer, and Charlie Andrus on the bass. So kind of an anonymous drummer there and bass player for me. But Herby Man, as a young man, he does some early work at Prestige. His work at Bethlehem, where there's at least 2, maybe 3 titles, is really fantastic. And they also had Sam Most, another great flautist as well. But Herby Man's early work here, and again, that's a classic Burt Goldblatt cover, and it really gives you a sense of the cutting edge of modernity in jazz graphic design. I mean, you have Herbie up on the flute being held by a flamingo. It just, those music stands are this, no, they're just lines. But it just has a wonderful, I mean, it's modern, yet it still has kind of a vintage feel to it. And it also kind of gives you a sense of where graphic design was heading and how a guy like Reed Miles was going to come along and really change graphic design. A record I hadn't played in quite a long time, to be honest, is John Coltrane's Dakar. Dakar, of course, is a city in Africa, capital of Senegal, if I recall. I had a friend who said he had traveled to Senegal, who was originally from Ethiopia. And Ethiopia has high elevation, making it a fairly cool, temperate climate for being in the tropic latitudes. By the time he got across the Sahara and got into Dakar, he said the desert runs right into the ocean, and the temperatures are just soaring in the day, and he didn't have the greatest things to say about Dakar. And then if I remember, there was a recent episode of the Grand Tour, the the Amazon show with the great BBC car guys, where they were supposed to end up in Dakar. They were going through Mauritania, through the desert and stuff, and I think there was some kind of civil unrest happening in Dakar, so they never made it into Dakar. But they were redoing that French Great African tour. But so this is wonderful. I got a call coming in. I had to take that phone call. It's my ex-wife. There were some tax problems with our 22 return because of her decline and disappearance, and we're trying to get that straightened out with the IRS. So one more thing that's just, I mean, there's a lot of stress in this life, and I mean, I'm thankful to have the perspective always of heartache and money problems to a black American in the 50s was a good day. So I just try to remind myself that people have overcome much greater things than some heartache and some money problems, but it does extend a toll on me. I mean, I'm pretty exhausted and just, I don't want to say I'm at a breaking point, but I always feel like I'm on the verge of exhaustion, and there's a part of you that just wants to quit at times. You know, you're just like, oh, I'm so exhausted. And I've always been a pretty upbeat person throughout my whole life, but her running away from the situation as a severe avoidant, which is part of what we're realizing with her therapy and self-analysis, it's really been hard. It's really been hard. So once again, I mentioned earlier in this episode, if you could help this cafe out, this channel out, please do, because it's been a trying year, and I've not really had the money to buy records or even really do much outside of just keep my bills caught up. It's been a lot, and I'm hoping the IRS is pretty flexible with us in terms of what they need from us. But and it sounds like there's some programs that we can qualify for, but I mean, it's just one more piece of stress on a set of legs that are already weary. So anyway, back to the car. Senegal. This is an interesting session. It's got two baritone players on it, and Cecil Payne's one. I believe it was Pepper Adams. And this has an earlier vintage. There was a 16 RPM session that Prestige put out. It was like French horns and baritones, something like that, and it was two different sessions on each side. But playing at that 16 RPM revolution, it meant that there was enough material on each side of those records to make two separate records. And the one becomes Curtis Fuller and French horns on Status / New Jazz, and the other one became Coltrane Dakar. And this was never really billed as a Coltrane session in its initial perfunctory existence. It was, I think, led by, it might not even had a leader, but it might have been Mal Waldron. I can't remember for sure. But anyway, Cecil Payne and Pepper Adams are both fantastic on this. The baritone is a wonderful horn, throaty and bossy, and just all kinds of rich, full timbre. I've always loved the baritone. So hearing two baritones on the same session is very interesting. And I think these sessions date from 54, 57 actually, a little later than I thought. Art Taylor, Mal Waldron, Dougie Watkins before he passed. And then you have Coltrane, Pepper Adams, and Cecil Payne on the tret tenors and baritones. Interesting session. Velvet Scene is fantastic. The song Dakar is great. And of course, this version of these sessions doesn't surface as Prestige 7280 until 1963 because the 16 RPM format wasn't long for this world, especially not for music, for spoken word. And a lot of people I've seen on some chat rooms have said they've hardly seen 16 RPMs. And I could tell you this with concrete positivity. My mom had all kinds of 16 RPMs. She had a lot of the Bible on LP. And those Bible records all played at 16 RPM aside. So they were really kind of better for spoken word and not really great for the sonics of music. But all that being said, the session sounds fine in its LP reproduction. And this, of course, is an OJC 80s rendition of it. Cool cover. And I said I really enjoyed Velvet Scene. It's a moody, dark, brooding piece. Again, and then when you have two baritones and a tenor, you're going to get kind of a brooding, menacing thing happening anyway with some dark clouds of thunder rolling through. Fun session, really worth seeking out. Me and my friend Brian, who comes over once a week or so to listen to jazz with me, he pulled this out the other day. Hampton Hawes. He's kind of on a Hampton Hawes kick. Great West Coast piano player. Worked with the guys like Dexter Gordon and Wardell Gray and a lot of the other West Coast luminaries of that early West Coast bebop scene on Central Avenue. Here he is playing with Harold Land, who has returned from his time with Clifford Brown, Max Roach, and he's decided to move on, go back to the West Coast and play. And he does some recordings as a leader for contemporary in this era. He also shows up on some side work here at that time. The great young Scott LaFaro and Frank Butler on the drums. And Scott LaFaro passes away shortly after this session was recorded. And they have a little tribute to LaFaro back. He died in a car accident, tragically. And I think this session was recorded several years before his passing. And it was probably his passing that spurred them to release this when they did, because he'd been working with Bill Evans for a couple years at that point. And the Evans-LaFaro stuff is really seminal piano trio, articulated bass, very influenced by Ray Brown, a very, one of the great bass players, really. LaFaro was a fantastic talent. Frank Butler's really one of the great drummers as well. So a pretty all-star lineup there. And I really enjoyed Harold Land on this, to be honest. I listened to it probably twice, once with him and once on my own. And it wasn't Hampton that really jumped out at me. It was Harold Land, who, again, playing with Clifford Brown and Max Roach for all those years, it probably was fun for him to take a step back and take a little bit of pedal off the gas and to play a little bit more mid-tempo, a little bit more melancholic, and a little bit more in the blues and a little bit less at 90 miles an hour all the time. A fun session here. This on the Urania label, number 1209. And if I'm not positive, I think some of this might have been taken from earlier 10 inches. And you have Jack Teagarden, Coleman Hawkins, and Willie the Lion Smith on one side. Coleman Hawkins, Teagarden, Ernie Royal, and Lucky Thompson on the other side. And Teagarden sings a couple songs on each side. And Teagarden, of course, and Armstrong were dear, close friends, really for life, if memory serves. They went back to the very early era in New Orleans, and their paths crossed many times. And I think he was part of Louis Armstrong's All-Stars in the 50s and 60s in an integrated group. Teagarden was a real beautiful tones player on the bone, but also a great singer. He's not one of those crystalline voices. It's more gravelly and got some heft to it, but it also is very expressive and very emotive. Really love Teagarden's singing, going down to St. James and for, and it's possible that these were both 10 inches, because Teagarden did have some 10 inches, and I think Willie Lyon did as well. And so Urania Jazz Series Mood and Blue, and it's not really attributed to any one artist, which again would make me think it's probably a couple from 10 inches. And it doesn't say that here anywhere, or even give a date for the recordings. But that's my guess, being 2 different lineups, 4 songs aside. But that being said, it's a fantastic session. I mean, I love Coleman Hawkins' lyricism on this. Lucky Thompson is fantastic. And there you have 2 of the great tenor greats. And of course, Hawkins is that first generation tenor player, and Thompson's kind of a bridge tenor player between your guys like Hawkins, Webster, and Lester Young, and your later generation guys like Rollins and Coltrane. It's guys like Lucky Thompson and Dexter Gordon that are kind of that bridge in between there. Lucky, of course, spent a lot of time in Europe, which made his fucking star decline here in America. But Willie Lyon was one of the great Harlem stride piano players. Ernie Royal was a great trumpet player, working with Basie's groups, and a great arranger. So some really great talent on that. Again, I'm pretty sure that's probably 10-inch stuff. A few more pieces here. I had a person here the other day who was a jazz guitarist. He asked me to play this Jim Hall Concierto record. And I mean, it's a fun listen. It's very much more modern and articulated than more traditional stuff I normally listen to on CTI number 6060, making it probably 1975, 76, maybe even later than that. Great cover. Once again, Creed Taylor, a master of beautiful graphic design and beautiful gatefold album covers and photography. And from his early work with Bethlehem through ABC Impulse into his Verve years, Creed Taylor has always been about great art, packaging this great music. And it's a really great session. Roland Hanna, Ron Carter, I mean, just Jim Hall's fantastic on this. Steve Gadd's on the drums. Chet Baker is fantastic on the trumpet. And then, of course, Paul Desmond is also in the fold. So what a great group of players you have there. Baker's at a resurgence here. Desmond's still a luminary figure on the alto. The side one, You'd Be So Great to Come Home To, is fantastic. You'd Be So Nice to Come Home To is just beautiful and fantastic. You really hear how articulated a guy like Steve Gadd and Ron Carter are. They're just nimbly playing through scales and chords, and playing in a way that rock guys just never could or would. Just fantastic. And then, of course, side 2 on this is Concierto de Aranjuez. I'm not really great at Spanish, but the same theme that Miles borrows from for Sketches of Spain. Here in a very long extended form. All side 2 is that piece. Moody, ethereal, bright and lemony and bitter at times, but also very melancholic and dry and dusty. And Sketches of Spain emanates a lot of that same feel. And here's another great version of some of that Spanish inflected jazz. Again, so it's a hybrid kind of thing at that point. Another Bethlehem piece I pulled out is a Smith Gayman Quintet. Another great Burt Goldblatt cover. I found this in Rockford, Illinois, in a little bookstore. They have like 4 copies of it. And I remember digging through their walls of jazz records, just thousands of records that were sorted to some degree. And I found a lot of Bethlehem stuff stashed in there that this is before I kind of had been professing the beauty of Bethlehem. And I found a lot of Bethlehem records that had multiple pressings in there, 10-inch and 12-inch, guys like Joe DeRise, just fantastic stuff. This is a harp-driven group with bass, accordion, guitar. Barry Galbraith on the guitar, wow. He's the biggest name there. Smith and Gayman, of course, are harp and bass, looks like. And Gayman, of course, is a female on the harp, Betty Gayman. And I think a lot of the harpists that you come across in jazz were female. It seems like an instrument very dominated by women. Your Dorothy Ashbys and your Alice Coltrane's, and I mean, go down that list. It's hard to think of a male harpist, to be honest. Again, the great Bethlehem Jazz label. This is number 22, probably squarely in 1955. Great Burt Goldblatt cover. It's light in the sense that it's not hard bop, it's not driving, it's not full of darkness and emoting in that heavier sense, socially, politically. But it's still great music. It's still bubbly and full of life. And here's a fun fantasy West Coast label by Mongo Santa Maria, part of the Latin jazz explosion. Mongo Santa Maria, I think he was Cuban if I remember. Fantastic percussionist. Willie Bobo is on this. Israel Del Pino, Modesto Duran, Mercedes Hernandez. Al McKibben shows up. Pablo Moza, Carlos Vidal, Francisco Agubela. I love the cover. It really kind of captures a moment in a scene. Some fantasy covers are better than others. That's probably one of my favorite fantasy covers, to be honest. It's a bit, it's a little bit novelty. This is not Afro Dizzy Gillespie. This is not fire in that nature. This is far more drum circle in the park feel at times. A lot of percussion, a lot of, I mean, it'd be fun to play during a mambo session, or if you had, what do you call when you kind of go into the little thing? I mean, it's that kind of a feel to it. Shirley Scott, Satin Doll, fantastic organ player. Shirley was a seminal figure in jazz throughout the 60s, married to Lockjaw Davis for a number of years. Her recordings for both Impulse and Prestige are fantastic. Her stuff for Prestige is far more black church and straight soul jazz than her Impulse recordings, with which again at Impulse you had more production. You had more people overseeing the proceedings, and they would often inflect larger ensembles on top of you, or string sections and written passages, and her work at Prestige stays black church all the time. I mean, it just comes with some rice and beans. It's just fantastic. It's always straight soul jazz. The girl plays the organ in a fiercely dominated male world. She sticks around a long time. Max Simpkins on the drums and George Tucker on the bass. And she does some Ellington on here, Perdido, Mooding, Indigo, Satin Doll, Don't Mean a Thing, Sea Gems, Blues, things like what they used to be. So those are all Ellington songs. So, I mean, you can never really go wrong doing Ellington. And then last but not least here, we're going to talk about my friend Mike and me were talking Parenti from the Jazz Bums about this session, which he recently purchased. And he was like, what is the lineage of that? Where does that fit in the Jazz the Philharmonic? And it took me a second to have to recall, but it's actually mostly this early Stinson Jazz the Philharmonic 10-inch Volume 1. And again, this was initially a book of 78s, with 4 78s. Each had a song on each side. Then it became a 10-inch in like 4950. And because it was Stinson, Ash, there's another third label that was kind of culminated there, that he licensed the stuff to Norman Granz. When he bought his Mercury stuff back and reissued it on his own on Clef, the Stinson stuff, he couldn't get it right away. And he finally got it probably 55 or 6. And so this is the Stinson stuff reissued on Clef finally, How High the Moon. And there's a couple other tracks added here too. But these sessions are from 46, 45, 47. So early JTP stuff that's also on this. So that's where this session comes in. And there's some great players on here, boy. I mean, I remember Willie Smith is on this, who's just fantastic. There's some great hard to read. Jack Cat's on here. Howard McGee's on here. Charlie Smith. Yeah, just some great guys. Fantastic blowing, fantastic post-war jazz that Norman Granz helps bring to the world, helping modernize that post-war era jazz. Norman Granz was hugely important in that. So that was my listens from the last week or so in the cafe. I'll put these pieces together and then edit them. Hopefully have these published by tomorrow. You all have a great day. Again, please help support the channel if you can. Support the coffee shop if you can. This place is important. I think it's important to have a nice archive of jazz for people to have access to and for me to be able to share it to. And if I end up losing the building and the business and probably my home, Lord knows what happens to my collection at that point too. I mean, it all becomes up in the air. And so there's a lot of strain right now, trying to figure out direction. So y'all be blessed, y'all be safe, keep loving that jazz music. Let's be smart and vote wisely in this upcoming election. And again, I love you all. Peace to all. Y'all have a great day. Peace.